Hi, I'm Malika Bilal, and you're in the stream. Today I'm talking to you from Facebook Live, a feature that allows journalists and people from around the world to broadcast directly from their phones. But what do platforms like this mean for the future of the news industry? Our digital producer, Omar Badar, is here looking out for your live feedback. Omar, this is a conversation about the internet. So, of course, people on the internet have lots to say, about it.
And, you know, one of the questions that we put out was whether social media platforms have a responsibility to make sure that all the content they put out is neutral. We have Bash Bello over here who says social media has overtaken most of the other medias with millions of users daily. It's only ethical that they should be neutral. On the other hand, we have Dan here who says even algorithms will inherit the biases of their creators. I don't expect a news aggregator to give me 100% neutral sources. Now, of course, for those of you at home, we want to know what you think. You can join this conversation by tweeting us using the hashtag AJStream.
My name is Habib Atta. I'm an investigative journalist and editor of BeirutReport.com, and I'm with you in the stream.
Facebook Mentions, which you saw me using at the beginning of the show, is just one of many ways in which social media companies are increasing their presence in the world of journalism. Over the past few years, Twitter, Snapchat, and Facebook have all built editorial teams and built up their reach. In the United States, 63% of users are getting news from Twitter. The same goes for Facebook, which now has 1.65 billion active users. Many traditional news publishers are now partnering with social media companies to tap into their audiences. But the new role of tech companies in the world of journalism has not come without controversy. Last week, former Facebook employees claimed they had suppressed conservative news from the site's trending section. Some of these ex-content curators also said they injected stories into the platform even if they hadn't been organically viral. Though Facebook has denied the allegations and reached out to conservatives, many are still wary of social media companies editing and curating news content. They argue these platforms have become news organizations with editorial leanings rather than neutral forums for unfiltered content. So, to what extent are social media companies controlling the way we consume news? To help us answer this, we're joined on set by Christopher Mims, a technology columnist at the Wall Street Journal. Joining us on Skype is Trevor Timm, the co-founder and director of the Freedom of the Press Foundation. He's based in San Francisco. Kate Gardner is an audience engagement specialist who works with media companies to define their digital futures. She joins us from Rio de Janeiro. And Aram Sinreich is an associate professor at American University, and he's based just outside of Washington, D.C. Welcome to the stream, everyone. Now, let's start on my laptop. Where else? With the latest news on this. It came out 19 hours ago on Wednesday. Mark Zuckerberg, founder, creator of Facebook, posted this after meeting with conservative leaders that he talked to them about how to make sure Facebook continues to be a place for them. And he says, we built Facebook to be a platform for all ideas. You see it in the picture there. Trevor, what's your take on the claim that Facebook suppresses some stories over others?
Well, I think the specific controversy over whether they were suppressing conservative stories is really beside the point. This is the first time that the public has really gotten a view of how powerful Facebook really is. You know, there was a recent study that was just done that of the major media companies in the United States, they get 40% of their traffic through Facebook. And you guys just showed that stat that 60% of people get their news through Facebook. Yet, so in that sense, Facebook has this incredible power, some would say unprecedented power, over what people see and don't see. So whether we're talking about trending news and people picking news topics, or the Facebook algorithm in people's news feeds, that is this invisible hand that often people aren't aware exists, that can make or break a news organization. And whether or not there was specific tampering in this specific situation, it really is worrying for news organizations down the road that Facebook has this power over them.
So Kate, Trevor talked about unprecedented power and invisible hand. These are really large terms here, large ideas. What do you make of them?
From my perspective, I work with all sorts of different media companies. We've kind of lost control of our audience, and that was the one asset that most major media companies had. That was how they were making their money. That was how they were throwing around their influence, and that was sort of also the way that the principle of an unbiased fourth estate came to be. And this new player in the game has really shifted the way that newsrooms get to interact with their audience. It isn't the game that we were playing when we started doing all of this.
So one of the things that people are discussing online is the level of trust that they have in the kind of news that they actually see on these platforms. So we have Mojam over here who tweeted in saying, "I trust algorithm-based news sources like Facebook Trends and Google News." On the other hand, we also got a video comment from someone who used to work at Facebook who would like to remain anonymous. Take a listen to what the person has to say.
As curators on the trending team, we were very aware of how much power we had over what stories people saw and didn't see. And there was also really no oversight that I remember, specifically related to which stories were and weren't chosen. So it was basically up to your discretion and your editorial judgment which stories you chose to trend that day on your shift. And as long as you met your number, no one would really question it or say anything.
So Christopher, this was a content creator for Facebook Trends. What do you make of what they had to say?
I mean, it's interesting because Facebook Trends is obviously a new product. It's imperfect. Facebook has said that from the beginning. I don't think we should blow this out of proportion. Facebook Trends is a tiny little piece of real estate in the upper right-hand corner of your screen. There's very little evidence that it has much influence over what people are consuming on Facebook. What really matters is what's called the news feed, and that's what determines what appears in your stream. I think the more interesting discussion is there bias in the news feed? None other than Glenn Beck just posted something to Medium saying, I met with Mark Zuckerberg.
Commentator in the U.S. for our international audience.
Right. And said, he sees no evidence of bias, even in the trending topics box. And in terms of whether there's bias elsewhere on Facebook where it really matters, which is in the news feed, he doesn't really buy that either. He asked Mark Zuckerberg, do you want to curate news like a news organization, or do you want to be an open platform? And Mark Zuckerberg said, absolutely, we want to be an open platform. I don't think it's an unreasonable goal. I don't think it's unattainable. I suspect that I'm probably going to disagree with most of our guests today because I think it's a little bit of a tempest in a teapot.
Okay, go ahead, Aaron.
So there's an old saying in my field, in communication studies in the academy, which is all artifacts have politics, right? You can't build a machine, and Facebook is really at heart a machine with some people inhabiting it and running it. You can't build a machine that isn't biased in one way or another, right? I mean, the seats in a bus require you to sit forward. The curtain in an auditorium hides the performers from the audience. Everything that we build has implicit biases that suggest that it should be used one way versus another way by one kind of person versus another kind of person. And I think the problem with Facebook vis-a-vis the media is that we have a very long history as a society of being able to spot the bias in the media. Everybody knows that Fox News is a mouthpiece for the conservative political wing of the American body politic. Everybody understands that that newspapers have editors, and these editors have opinions. So they come out and they endorse candidates every time there's an election. The problem is that we know how to parse that bias in a newspaper. We know how to identify who the editors are and read that back into the way that we receive the news. On the other hand, we view Facebook as this kind of magical box made of silicon and ones and zeros that somehow, flawlessly can transmit unbiased information. And that expectation is the real problem here. Facebook is built by people and operated by people, and those people have biases that are going to play out in the platform itself.
So you said something, spot the bias, and I'm wondering if that could ever then be a good thing when you can't spot it, but maybe you should. This is an example I'm thinking of. This is what the Gizmodo report revealed. This is one of the little tidbits. A former Facebook worker said that people stopped caring about what was happening in Syria, and if it wasn't trending on Facebook, it would make Facebook look bad. So now whether that was trending or whether that was the news feed, as you mentioned, Christopher, if people aren't posting about it, it makes the site look bad. So then could it be considered a good thing that that's injected into the conversation?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, if Facebook wants to be a curator of news and alter the conversation, they're completely within their rights. They're allowed to do that. I think that they will now hesitate to because, you know, they've been accused of bias. So maybe one of the unexpected effects of this is that stories that we would like Facebook to surface, maybe they're not going to anymore. I mean, they could move to a totally algorithmic trending topics box, just like Twitter has. And, you know, I don't know if you guys can look at Twitter right now, but I guarantee you, like, the top 5 trending topics there are, like, memes, jokes, they're, like, dirty. I mean, does Facebook really want that, right? You've got to choose one or the other. But I'm kind of afraid almost that we're pushing them toward a purely algorithmic solution.
Omar, I want to get what the community is saying, but just because Christopher mentioned it, take a look at the top 5 trending topics on Twitter. Number 1 is National Send a Nude Day. And so these are the ones that are more algorithmic, but of course they do also have Twitter moments, which show you things that are curated by actual people.
Yeah,
and these are things that they've gotten, you know, a team of people to say, hey, these are the things you should check out. Omar?
Yep. So, you know, on the point that Aram just made a little bit earlier about knowing what the bias is, we have some commentary from our online community about that. We have Naomi here who says, just like news organizations, they have a responsibility to be open about their biases, not falsely claim non-existent neutrality. And then we also got a video comment from Ramesh, who is talking about something that is also very similar along the same lines. Take a listen to what he has to say.
Bias is inevitable when it comes to news. When we were talking about older media platforms, bias was always built into the question of what stories were covered and the angle that was chosen in covering them. And in terms of social media, any algorithm which orders and personalizes information is going to contain various forms of bias built into it. The question is the lack of transparency into these choices, and that's where the problem lies.
Kate, can you think of how that could actually work in practice to disclose biases? I mean, would you basically post who the editors are and what their views are? How would that actually work in practice? Is there a way to do it?
I actually don't know that there's an obligation on Facebook's part to do that, but if they were to go towards a public editor type situation, so they were to follow editorial standards and practices, that would be a different understanding of how Facebook works as a company. That said, since they are the primary source of news for all these people, they may have an obligation to establish ethics and standards in the way that other news organizations, the Washington Post, the Associated Press, a lot of the BBC, everybody has an internal standards and practices unit that is analyzing, you know, the content that's being made and looking for those biases, looking for inaccuracy, looking for sort of the problems that they're complaining about. I think the principle, the crux of this matter really is, though, that you're holding a technological advancement, a platform responsible for an expectation that we have for a media company, and that specifically for a media company that is producing content. Facebook doesn't yet produce content, so it doesn't have the same sort of sociological requirements that we might expect of a news organization.
I agree entirely.
If we were to implement... Go ahead.
Oh, no, continue, please. Well, what I was going to say is, in addition to that excellent point that Kate just made, there's also a structural problem preventing Facebook from being a media company, which is that its infrastructure and its business model are totally different. The way that Facebook makes most of its money is actually by enforcing opacity rather than transparency. You know, when you post something to your Facebook page, only 5 or 10% of your friends are going to see that post. And the reason that Facebook restricts access to your posts is because they make their money taking media companies and taking consumer brands and selling their own audience's attention back to them. You know, if the Wall Street Journal has a story they want to promote on Facebook, they can just put it on their page, but only 5% of their fans are going to see it. They're going to have to pony up hundreds of dollars per article just to make sure that a larger percentage of their existing fan base who like them on Facebook actually see the article. And the problem is, if they're organized in a way to promote you know, a lack of transparency, to hide customers from brands, they can't simultaneously be transparent about what their biases are.
So I think that raises an interesting question, Trevor. I want to throw this at you by showing you something, because I'm wondering, is this then just a problem of transparency? Take a look at what some other companies are doing. We mentioned Twitter has their moments. Snapchat, an app that all the young people are using, and older people also.
A whole new side of Snapchat. Tap a channel to see what's new.
So they have their Discover feeds, and they partnered with media organizations, certain ones, not all of them, to then have their feeds and the content that that media organization wants featured. They also have a live events section, and they have content curators. So it's a problem that Facebook didn't tell us that they had curators, whereas Twitter and Snapchat have made it pretty clear that they have people behind it.
Yeah, I think there's two things we have to look at here. Whether, one, does Facebook have the right to do this? And I think unequivocally they do. Despite the fact that they are on a vastly broader scale than media organizations, and they act in different ways than traditional media organizations, they still have a First Amendment right as publishers to decide, are we going to use editors to do this? Are we going to write our own algorithms to do this? But then the question becomes, how transparent are they going to be? There was a recent study, for example, that found that 60% of Facebook users had no idea that there was even a filtering algorithm whatsoever in their newsfeed, let alone that there was 1,000 different points that this algorithm was using. And so, when we talk about how people receive their news and whether they understand that this is happening, then we get into the question of what type of power does Facebook have when it comes to news organizations. If you talk to anybody in a news organization, you will tell them they're increasingly beholden to Facebook traffic. They have whole teams that are working on figuring out when Facebook tweaks what's going on in their news feed so that they can get the maximum amount of traffic. And Facebook has the ability, whether they exercise it or not, to cripple a news organization almost instantly. There was a popular celebrity news site, for example, a few weeks ago that had their page, which had 4 million likes, deleted by Facebook without an initial explanation, and they just saw their traffic plummet. This also happens in more subtle ways when Facebook changes their algorithm, which they do constantly, and news organizations are playing catch-up, trying to figure out exactly how to work the system so that they can continually receive this traffic hose. And it's really up to Facebook whether they survive or not. And I think that's the real problem here, rather than talking about whether Facebook has the right to do this, but
not to mention not to mention how to work the system, though, if that's what you're saying, if that's true.
I mean, I think we have to be careful that we don't conflate Facebook's power with bias, right? I mean, Facebook has you make some excellent points, right? Like, Facebook has the power to dictate what kinds of content are going to be viral. Right now, Facebook is pushing video really heavily. This is why, BuzzFeed infamously exploded a watermelon in front of like a million people.
Which we all watched. Raise your hand if you didn't watch it. Pretty much everyone watched it. It's not news, but it gets the views.
Right, but is that bias? Right. So Facebook is forcing media organizations to create certain types of content, but an exploding watermelon is not inherently political.
But specifically on this tension between them and news organizations, we have somebody who has a different take from Trevor's, Taher over here, who says they're doing great for people. Even media itself is getting some great benefits from the way that these social media platforms are operating. Do you think that there's actually tension there, or do you think that there's a way that these organizations are working well together?
Right. I mean, this is the sort of counter-argument I think people don't consider. How many new media businesses have been created because Facebook has grabbed so much attention and now has the ability to steer traffic to them? I mean, like, I think in the days of Google, we got in the habit of thinking like, oh, Google, killed the newspaper. Craigslist killed, the classified section, and news went away. I mean, I lived through that winter in media, and now I'm living through what feels like a spring where people are getting hired, they're getting jobs. Why? Because Facebook is sending traffic to those organizations. Now, is it scary when Facebook redirects that traffic? Absolutely. But, should we question that bounty because they have that power?
Well, yes, I think we should question that bounty. It's not just that Facebook... It's not just that Facebook has the power to turn the flow of traffic on and off, or to divert it from point A to point B. It's that because media companies are aware of that power, they actually shift what they're covering and how they cover it in order to maximize the exposure that they're going to get on Facebook. Essentially, every media company in the world is now competing to gain the same set of eyeballs by gaming the same algorithm that Facebook has offered. And, it becomes a kind of, carnival or spectacle where it's not the most truthful story that wins or the best research story, the best written or presented story. It's the one that actually produces the most clicks in the shortest amount of time. And I think that creates a very different kind of public sphere than newspapers and television did.
So Trevor, you set up a firestorm because Christopher wants to respond, Kate wants to respond. I want to show you one thing though that I thought of when you were talking. One of the benefits, I would say, this is Facebook's feature. It's called Instant Articles. Several media partners, Al Jazeera English is one of them. If you take a look here, this is what it looks like. You can go to your phone and you go to any mobile phone, and when you see an article with someone who's partnered with this, you click on the article, and it's called Instant Article for a reason. It instantly pops up. You scroll there. You never actually leave the site. So on the one hand, it could be bad because they're not actually going to AlJazeeraEnglish.com. On the other hand, they're reading our content instantly. Kate?
But Malika, the problem with that is that we have created a news organization, and almost every organization besides Al Jazeera is cashing out on people going to their website and seeing advertisements that would then play on their page. We aren't necessarily making money from the content that we're distributing. We're not the movie industry. We are the news industry, which has existed side by side to advertising. By being sort of having a symbiotic or parasitic, depending on your perspective, relationship with a platform like this, the content that's being chosen by the algorithm is being unfairly favored. But the other thing that we're doing is we have ceded the ability to create a way of consuming our news that actually serves our consumers. It is easier to consume a piece of content on Facebook Instant, and that is fantastic for Facebook, and it is fantastic for Facebook users.
The other thing is
horrible for a media company that cannot monetize that traffic. And if you don't have that significant relationship with Facebook, you aren't going to be a publisher that makes any money off of content that you build for Facebook Instant.
Trevor, I know you want to jump in here, but
it's a very different business model. It's a very different structure, and it also starts to weigh against you in terms of brand capital, audience engagement, and brand recognition over time.
I just want to work in
your influence and your.
Yeah, I want to work in one comment here that we're getting from community about how curation is inherently problematic, and basically the solution cannot come from there. We have Krista who says, real news neutrality for social media platforms is to stay out of content production and curation. Let the users do that. And then we have an example of somebody doing that. Ahmad says, Twitter, in my opinion, is the best platform for this. I created a list of all the major news handles on my timeline, and I scroll through them for the latest news now and then. Trevor, do you think that this is what it might have to boil down to? Is people realizing that it's really up to them instead of relying on what is curated to them through these platforms?
Well, certainly it's up to user choice, but so even Twitter is moving towards an algorithmic timeline. Though people still have the choice, they're increasingly putting that as the default for new users. But I want to get back to something that was talked about previously, and I think we need to look at this from a more long-term perspective. Right now, Facebook is framing this as we're incentivizing news organizations to use Facebook more. We're paying them to use live video. We're partnering them with instant articles. But what happens 5 or 10 years down the road when Facebook now has an iron grip on these news organizations where they're all posting to Facebook's platform, because if they don't, Facebook won't send them traffic, and then they up and decide to change the rules. And I think this is what really worries people in the news industry, is that Facebook is pushing and pushing and pushing news organizations in a direction where they have to comply with what Facebook wants to do. And while they're getting the fruits and the benefits now, later on it could completely turn against them.
Ooh, that's a scary forecast there you just gave us. I'm going to pause the conversation right there. I want to thank all of our guests for joining us here today. It's all the time we have in our main show, but there is more. We're going to be streaming live, taking all of our guests, Christopher, Trevor, Kate, and Aram, to our online post show. Guess where it's streaming? not Facebook, stream.aljazeera.com. See you there.
Welcome back to the Streams Online Post Show. Let's get back to our discussion about the role of social media organizations in the world of journalism. Now, we're getting some comments here from our online community about whether there's a responsibility at all for these organizations to be neutral. We have Shabina over here who tweeted in saying, folks curate their individual interests. Professional news sources should be held responsible to maintain neutrality, not individuals. And we also got a video comment from Yusuf Omar. He is the mobile editor of the Hindustan Times. Take a listen to what he has to say.
In social media, people do surround themselves by others that have like-minded opinions, but that's not all that different to real life, where many of our friends and family have similar values and beliefs. I'm particularly interested in Snapchat. The live stories are highly curated, by hand, and it's often only the good news, the fluff. You never get a really critical perspective of the area or location that they're covering. Until Snapchat actually take that curation from being happy, feel-good stuff to telling a real story with both sides, we can't use it as a real news source.
Christopher, does it really boil down to ultimately being a culture where we don't rely on these outlets and think of them as news outlets, and therefore, just if you think of it as an entertainment, neutrality becomes an insignificant thing in a sense?
Right. I mean, in the sense of Snapchat, like, are we expecting Snapchat to be a serious news source? I don't think so now, unless you're specifically clicking on the New York Times or the Wall Street Journal's story. In the case of Facebook, I mean, from our discussion, I think that people do expect it to be a little bit more neutral, and they're certainly striving for that. So, yeah, I mean, it's only like 6% of the links on Facebook shared are hard news. But if you think about sort of the identity politics that's going on in Facebook, how people associate, I mean, Yusuf mentioned that, like, the number one way we filter our feed is just who we choose to associate with. Is that new? No. We used to call that the echo chamber. The echo chamber, I had our etymologist at Wall Street Journal look this up. The first instance he could find of the modern use of the term echo chamber was in 1840, and that was in a Scottish magazine. So we have always associated with people with like minds. We've always filtered the information that's coming in. This is not a new concern in any way. The question is, are we doing it differently now, and can we do better?
Mm. You know, Kate, one of the things I was thinking about during this conversation, and it peaked with something you said, is about whose audiences are these? And that's an inarticulate way to say, you know, when we have people going to Facebook to view content of media organizations, is that audience Facebook's audience, or is it, let's say, Al Jazeera English's or Wall Street Journal's audience who's going to the place where they normally go to swap photos of their friends and happen to then see a news article?
It's not our audience in that we have no control over how many people engage with our content. When you were printing a newspaper and you could deliver it to someone's home, or you were sending news via a cable news channel to someone's home via a physical link, you had some guesstimate of who could at least be exposed to it. But there's no transparency in that way on Facebook's behalf, and that hits publishers where it hurts. Our value to as institutions is our audience, the demographics of that audience, their location, their socioeconomic status, so how much money they make, how educated they are, things like that. And by co-opting our audience to Facebook and then only being able to access, 10 or so % of it before we have to pay to distribute content to those people, we aren't doing ourselves any favors, and we are hurting ourselves in the long term.
Wow. And when you were talking, I saw Aram nod his head. Aram, what are you thinking?
Well, I wish I could give you a magic bullet that would just solve this problem, but it's really a structural problem. The age of mass media is over. The values that adhered to, the big newspapers of the 20th century and the big radio and television networks of the 20th century are no longer social values that we can aim towards. So the question becomes, how do we keep a democratic, self-ruling, educated society where people can get access to good information and share opinions and ideas about what to do with that information? And I think ultimately it does get back, as Trevor was saying, to an informed user base, right? People need to be able to intuit the kinds of biases that are baked into the platforms. People need to have the freedom to upload and share and interpret and remix the information they come across. And that comes down to a lot of very wonky stuff like net neutrality or copyright law. Freedom of speech on the internet, I think, is really ultimately going to be the best inoculation we have against turning into a globe full of idiots who don't understand the world well enough to play a role in shaping it.
Yeah, I completely agree with that. I think when you look at how this controversy played out, the First Amendment and free speech played a critical role here. Facebook has a First Amendment right to decide what goes on its site and what doesn't, even if we don't like it. But the American public also has the right to push back and hold Facebook accountable in the public sphere, which I think is what has happened here. Facebook has received for the first time a torrent of criticism about how it shares news, and in the process is trying to get more transparent. Now, we can argue about whether they have actually done a good job of that, and whether they're actually bending over backwards and going too far in the other direction as far as bias or unbiased is concerned, given that everything is biased. There's no way to be neutral about anything. But it is a good lesson in how to hold companies like this accountable in an age where they have this unprecedented power.
We'll see if it's a lesson learned. I want to give the last word here to Christopher, who we haven't heard from in a second. But before I want to show our audience something just to show how international this is, and we're looking for the future. This is a study done by the University of Oxford Reuters Institute. Took a little survey of social media users asking where they get their news. In Brazil, urban parts of Brazil that they polled, 48% got it from online sources first. Denmark, 44%, and Japan, only 11%. So it kind of shows you the range there. But people are going to these sites to get their news. So that leads me to my final question to you. Where do you see us, crystal ball, media landscape in 5 years? What do you see it looking like?
I do think that Kate's right, that Facebook is going to take more power. Oddly, based on my conversations with that team, I don't think that they want it. I don't think that they realize how much power they have to drive traffic now. And I think Facebook is going to get deeper and deeper into becoming what looks like a media organization, and that this is definitely not the last that we've heard of this particular controversy. Because as they gain more power, people are going to say, you're the gatekeeper now. What kind of judgment are you making?
Scary, and we'll tune back in for that, of course. Final word from our community, Omar?
I'll leave you with a couple of thoughts here from Jimmy, who says Facebook's responsibility is to be what its users want it to be. It was developed in the hopes of amassing a fortune, and it did. And then a funny thought here from Krista, who says, we fall into a weird dystopia where social media are expected to provide the news, and news is expected to be social.
I like that. Thanks for the comments. Thanks for watching, to our online community, and to our guests, Christopher, Trevor, Kate, and Aram. We'll see you online.